So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about my personal reasons for supporting Ukraine. I'm going to cover the daily events, but then afterwards I'm going to tie it to why I support Ukraine. Here's today's chapters: update on the fighting on the ground, infighting within the Russian military, update on the Makiivka and retaliation for that, drones potentially leading to robots being employed in war. Not quite yet, but we're on the way to that. The American drone parts revealed in Shahed drones, Putin's new messaging, which signals a much longer war, and then fun with Russian state media. And then I'm going to talk about why I personally support Ukraine. So, why I personally support Ukraine, I'm going to give you just a little bit right now. It started in high school. Not supporting Ukraine, but the seed that caused me to be here right now started in high school, and I'm going to tell you that story on the other side of today's events. If you don't know me, my name is Gerdes. I'm a professor of management. I study leadership, and I'm just everything that I do is focused on leadership. And so when the Ukraine war hit, and I hear Zelensky say on day 2, I need ammunition, not a ride. I'm like, whoa, who is this guy? And what's going on? And wow. And so I've been engrossed in what's going on every day since. And so I wrote a ebook on Zelensky in short order within 3 weeks, and then I updated it for the next four almost 5 months. It's free on Amazon if you have Kindle Unlimited, and it's like $3.99 otherwise. And then I switched gears, and on day 85, I started doing video updates, and I've been doing video updates every day since until now, and it's day 315. I haven't missed a day since. So I've been studying what's been going on. Okay, here are today's events, and if you're new and you have not heard me before, please consider subscribing. So I want to start with the fighting on the ground. So over the last 24 hours, units of the Defense Forces of Ukraine repelled attacks by invaders in, and they list a number of areas in and around Bakhmut. Okay, and so they've been doing that. The destruction of the enemy on January 2nd was confirmed in the areas of 2 settlements here, and they described that, including 10 units of military equipment and ammo depots and all kinds of things here. And up to 260 soldiers of the Russian armed forces were liquidated and wounded. Now, what's interesting about that is they don't normally talk about and wounded. They normally talk about just those killed. But here, 260 were killed or wounded. And that's really interesting because they usually describe it the other way. The ISW's latest report was also very interesting. Russian President Vladimir Putin approves a series of instructions for Russian agencies and high-level officials on January 2nd, likely to address criticisms of the Kremlin's treatment of military personnel. And we talked about this yesterday. The 11 instructions direct several high-ranking members of the Russian government, including Defense Minister Shoigu, to take some actions. Systemic failures in Russia's force generation apparatus continue to plague personnel in the detriment of Russian operational capacity. The Russian military is jacked up. Their leadership has significant problems of actually making things happen like they're supposed to. And then it's going to affect the grunt on the front line significantly. Wagner Group financier Prigozhin attempted to justify Wagner Group's lack of progress in Bakhmut. Remember, they're fighting in Bakhmut partly because it's the only place that they seem to have been getting traction, but partly because it's Wagner troops, and many of them come from prisons, and they're expendable, and they can just feed them into the meat grinder. Prigozhin stated that Wagner Group forces in Bakhmut are unable to break through Ukrainian defenses in Bakhmut. Prigozhin stated that Wagner's offensive operations in Bakhmut are highly attritional because each house in Bakhmut is a fortress, that Ukrainians have defensive lines every 10 meters, and that Russian forces must clear building by building. Now, understand why he's frustrated, because the way that the Russians have conducted war so far is to completely obliterate the city so that this doesn't happen. I conducted a interview early on in the war. If you go to my page here, War in Ukraine, and you scroll down, and there's videos, popular videos, daily updates, and then there's explainers. Scroll over here. No, not explainers. It's to Leader Smith podcast. I was doing videos on the Leader Smith podcast. It was just talking about all about leadership stuff. And then the war hit, and 9 months ago, well, everything changed, and I started just focusing on Ukraine. And so I split the channel because I realized I was alienating this audience that only wanted to hear about leadership, and all I wanted to talk about was this. Okay, so I interviewed this expert about how to defend, an urban warfare expert tells us how to defend a Ukrainian city, like what he would do. And they're doing it in Bakhmut. If you want insight into what's actually happening in Bakhmut, watch that particular video. I'll link it at the very end if you'd like. Underneath the page, I'll link it in the description. How to defend a Ukrainian city. Now, what the Russians normally do is just obliterate the city. That way they don't have to run into all the problems that they're running into right now in Bakhmut. They can't take the ground. Okay? Prigozhin is likely setting information conditions to blame Wagner Group failure to take Bakhmut on Russian Ministry of Defense or Russia's industrial base, not providing enough artillery, for example. Wagner Group soldiers told Prigozhin that they were unable to break through Ukrainian lines at Bakhmut due to insufficient armored vehicles, ammunition, and 100mm shell supplies. So that makes a lot of sense of what is going on the ground there and why they're unable to actually take it like they were with Severodonetsk, which they just obliterated. And okay, so let's keep going on. Russia says cell phone use, this is the AP, Russia says cell phone use targeted, helped the Ukrainians target. It may have or it may not have, but let's hear what it had to say. Unauthorized use of cell phone by Russian soldiers led to a deadly Ukrainian rocket attack on the facility where they were stationed, according to the Russian military, as it raised the death toll this weekend to 89. They originally claimed 63. Now, we'll come back to this when we have fun with Russian state media in just a little bit, but hold on to that thought. UK intelligence officials on Wednesday said that Moscow's unprofessional military practices were likely partly to blame for the high casualty rates of the troops. That was right from the Ministry of Defense update. I read that earlier and then I put it aside. Given the extent of the damage, there's a realistic possibility that ammunition was being stored near the troop accommodation, which was detonating during the strike, creating secondary explosions. Okay, with all that in mind, and that hundreds of troops were stationed there, this figure of up to 89 seems pretty unbelievable. Nonetheless, they're mourning in Russia, mourning, finger pointing in Russia after scores were killed in the Makiivka rocket strike. This is what the building, well, former building looks like. And you see it from a number of different angles. It's hard to imagine that if hundreds were stationed there, that only 89 are actually killed. That's what it looked like. So it was pretty easy to target. Denis Davdov did a good job with this, showing it on a map the other day. Again, that's another angle of it. This is all that's left of the building. And so they confirmed 89 because that's what they've pulled out of the rubble. But I don't think that they're going to tell the truth about however many come. They're mourning in Russia, as they should be for their children. But they're just getting a taste of what Ukraine's actually going through. Like it's just hitting these people that this is what's happening to millions of people in Ukraine. And yeah, so that's why I wanted to show you what was going on there. In the meantime, President Zelensky talked about, this is his website, and he's talking about their retaliation efforts. Yesterday, Russian terrorists destroyed the ice rink in Makiivka, Donetsk region, with a missile. The ice arena, Altar, started working before the war when Donbass had a normal life before Russia came. Children trained there. There was a children's sports school. Hockey competitions were held there. People played sports there, celebrated, and just enjoyed life. Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and he names a number of other places. Everyone knew what kind of arena it was, and many people visited it. Last year, it was used to collect and distribute humanitarian aid. The Russian missile strike against Altar is another confession of the terrorist state. Now listen, when you strike a post of your enemy, that's a legitimate thing in war. When you're striking here, that's a war crime. That's terrorism. There's no way, and I'll show you on the map exactly where this is. This is the deep state map. This is Bakhmut. This is where the ice rink was. The ice rink was 36 kilometers away from the front lines. There's no military purpose there other than for Russia to terrorize their Ukrainian enemies just because they can. and that's really the difference here between what's going on between Ukrainians who are actually fighting on the front lines and fighting soldiers and Russians who are terrorizing a civilian population, which is a war crime. Okay, Ukraine claims to have shot down nearly 500 enemy drones. Wow. So over the course of the war, now this isn't just yesterday or anything. This is over since we will prepare. Now they've shot down 84 drones. 84 out of 84 is the record since 2023 began. That's pretty good. We will prepare, we will shoot down drones. As you can see, 84 drones were shot down in 2 days on New Year's Eve, and the following day, 100% were shot down by the air defense forces. So they're getting pretty good at this. Drones are slower, they're easier to target, but it's expensive to target. Such results have never been achieved before. The number of drones is already approaching 500 since September 11th. That is 500 drones shot down. That's pretty amazing. Now, drone warfare, I keep telling you, is the way of the future. So militaries all over the world are watching very closely what's going on, because drone advances in Ukraine could bring the dawn of killer robots or some kind of additional technology. So the Ukrainians are crazy innovative in the way that they do things. They're very focused on taking that next leap, and they're very flexible. They're very, in the business terms, they would be agile, right? They're not doing the same thing that worked before. They're trying something new and keep iterating until they get to something that has an effect. Drone advances could soon bring the world's first fully autonomous fighting robots to the battlefield. The longer the war lasts, the more likely it becomes that drones will be used to identify, select, and attack targets without help from humans, according to military analysts. That would mark a revolution in military technology, as profound as the introduction of the machine gun. Like, think about how that changed the dynamic, or gunpowder, or like this could be. The next war, I said, would be largely fought by not by robots, largely fought by drones. But it might also be fought by robots as well. I mean, just think about this. Think about how from World War I to World War II, there were tanks designed in World War I to circumvent the trenches, and that was largely the mainstay in World War II. Same thing here. The technology to achieve a fully autonomous mission with Switchblade pretty much exists today. That will require a policy change to remove the human from the decision-making move, and he estimates that that's only 3 years away. So there's something very significant coming down the pike because of what's happening in Ukraine today. Okay, let's also talk about what's in the drones. So a single Iranian attack drone found to contain parts from more than a dozen U.S. companies. So are these U.S. companies being bad and whatever? No, it's not that. Parts made by more than a dozen U.S. and Western companies were found inside a single Iranian drone downed in Ukraine last fall. The U.S. has for years imposed tough export control restrictions and sanctions to prevent Iran from obtaining high-end materials. Now U.S. officials are looking at enhanced enforcement. Now, what's happening here is not that Texas Instruments is selling stuff to Iran. It's going from one party to another, to maybe Iran. Okay? There's no evidence suggesting that any of these companies are running afoul of U.S. sanction laws and even knowingly exporting technology. Of the 52 components Ukrainians removed from the Iranian Shahed 136 drone, 40 appear to have been manufactured by 13 different American companies, according to the assessment. Okay, so those parts are in there. So this is why I say, or one of the reasons why I said sanctions don't work. Like, so sanctions alone don't work. They can help, they can have some effect, they can slow the process down, but alone they don't work. So some people are like, let's just not fight, let's just have sanctions. It doesn't work. You have to settle it with boots on the ground. The article goes on. It's far easier for Russian and Iranian officials to set up shell companies to use to purchase the equipment and to evade sanctions than it is for Western governments to uncover those front companies. But they have to play whack-a-mole, and they're going to be. Iran and Russia are going to try to go around those sanctions and will try to change their acquisition channels. And that's precisely what we want to focus on, getting in the field, opening up those systems, tracing the components, and monitoring for changes. And that's what they're going to be doing. Okay, let me switch gears yet again. Okay, let's switch gears again. On New Year's, I gave my 2023 predictions, and among them was that Putin is not going to stop anytime soon. This article yesterday says exactly the same thing. Vladimir Putin has just admitted Russia is in serious trouble. Now, his speech on New Year's is what is a triggering factor. The symbolism matters. Now, the symbolism of him standing in front of this audience of somewhat fake, like she's been shown to be in multiple photos of grieving mothers, or just average person on the street, or here she's not actually military, she's an actor. The symbolism matters. In modern Russia, the head of state's New Year's speech is an important tradition that seeks to set the tone for the coming new year. On this occasion, the mood Putin sought to convey was one of a country facing the prospect of a long and difficult war. Now, that is a sea change from what it was before. Remember, the special military operation was it's just a special military operation. You can go to jail for calling it a war because it's not really a war. It's just this little thing on the side here, and it's going to be no problem. We're going to knock it over in a couple of days, maybe a few weeks, and then we'll be done. But it's not a war. But now he's changed the rhetoric, and he's changed, and bad things are coming down the pike from Russia. So just watch. Domestic opponents were also targeted. In an apparent reference to the large numbers of military-age Russian men who chose to flee the country in the second half of 22 rather than join the invasion, he noted that the past 12 months had, quote, put a lot of things in their place, clearly separating courage and heroism from betrayal and cowardice. He's going to close the border. He's going to close the border in some time and have mobilization, another round of mobilization. I have said again and again on this channel, Russia cannot win without another wave of mobilization, maybe full mobilization. That's their only hope. With that, they have a chance. Without that, there is no chance for Russia to win. And another wave of mobilization, I would be willing to bet, is coming down the pike. There was no frivolous talk of love, trust, and hope as in December 2021. Putin seems to believe, or at least wants the Russian to believe, that Russia is tottering on the edge of a precipice with its very existence as a coherent state now in danger because of Ukraine. I think he called it an existential threat in the speech. I could be wrong, but I think he did in that speech. So Putin's speech was an unambiguous attempt to mobilize Russian society and place the whole country on a war footing. I'm afraid that's right, and that is why in this video I talk about how it's not going to be a short war. If you think it's going to be over in a couple of months, I don't believe it will be. I want it to be. I want Ukraine to have the suffering stop and have it stop the right way, but I don't believe it will be. So these are my predictions for 2023. Okay, now let's turn our attention to fun with Russian state media. Ukraine's Makiivka strike, says Pravda. 89 Russian soldiers killed on New Year's Day. That number has increased from 63, as we talked about earlier. The military claimed that it was the use of mobile phones. They said the same thing. And then Russian forces destroyed the launchers of HIMARS multiple rocket systems from which the armed forces of Ukraine attacked Makiivka, Lieutenant General Surikov said. Okay. 4 HIMARS systems and 4 RM-70 Vampire MLRS combat systems, more than 800 rockets, and 8 vehicles were destroyed. This is the claim Lieutenant General Surikov said. Now, what we know is that a quick Google search will reveal there's no news about it. I mean, if there was, it would be headline kind of news. But if he lies about this, why wouldn't he be lying about 63 or 89? Right? So you got to question what's going on. If he's saying it's increased to 89, but he's saying 4 HIMARS, which is the bigger lie, right? So if he's willing to tell the big lie, why wouldn't he tell a little lie? And that's why you can't trust it. What he did do was destroy a ice rink. So here is Altar Ice Arena, which Zelensky was talking about earlier. It's believed that the Russian, now this was a fascinating line to be put in Pravda. It's believed that Russia struck the Altar Arena in response for Ukraine's attack on the village of Makiivka on January 1, when 89 people were killed. But the next line, listen to this. It was reported that there were as many as 600 Russian military men staying in the building. Now, you saw the images for yourself. Like, who are you going to believe? The Russians or your lying eyes? You saw that flattened building. As many as 600 Russian military men staying in the building. Now, the Ukrainians were estimating 400 killed. Not everybody needed to be there at the same time, so that could be realistic. But 89, that just seems improbable. Here is some video of what the aftermath looks like. So this was the retaliation. This is what they did to him for blowing up the barracks. I'm not sure that I understand the logic, but... So I promised you that I would give you my reasons for supporting the Ukrainians and what was in my thinking. And it clicked for me this morning when I went, that's it. That's right. And then I have to draw you back to high school, so it's going to be a bit of a story. Please bear with me. So I'm reading the Green Berets this morning. I read voraciously, and so I'm just reading this book. I have it on an Audible book, and I'm listening to it. And there was a story about there's an intelligence officer who is bringing information to his commander, saying, "Hey, we know that the VC is right outside of this area. They're about to attack this small village. These people are, they're peasants. They're not." They're not doing anything, they're not political, but they're about to destroy this village. He brings the information forward. He says, well, there's a army of the Republic of Vietnam, the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese regulars, not too far from there, 10 kilometers or something like that away from the village. If we alert them, they can get there now. Well, they wouldn't go to fight. They just would not go to fight. The Americans couldn't get there to that village in time, but the army of the people of Vietnam, their army was close enough to do it, but they wouldn't do it. So the next day, they find out that the people are destroyed in the village. Children's charred bodies are lying around and things along those lines. And the guy's livid, right? Why wouldn't they go to fight? I thought that's right. That's why I support Ukraine. They fight. They want to fight. They're willing to fight. Think about the U.S. involvement in other places, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. In Iraq, at least you had the Kurds in the north who wanted to fight, but in Afghanistan, like you could train them all day long to fight, but they didn't want to fight. They wouldn't fight. But in Ukraine, what they say? What did Zelensky say? I need ammunition, not a ride, right? And Ukrainians wanted to fight. They look. No, you don't have to send troops. Give us the weapons. So give them the weapons. Why would we not give them the weapons to repel the attack on their homeland? Yes, it costs money, but it costs a lot more to have World War III. Now, I spent a lot of time with this kind of thing, thinking through this, and I told you it started in high school. When I was in Army JROTC in high school, I had a senior Army instructor. His name was Colonel Tui, and he was in the Special Forces in the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And he, one year, jettisoned the actual curriculum that we were supposed to, and we started reading this. Is Vietnam, Vietnam, A History by Stanley Carno. Okay, this book made an incredible, he had firsthand experience, so he was telling us what he experienced in the process, or what was going on and why. And I was so struck with the idea: how do you win a war militarily and lose a war politically? Well, it all comes down to leadership, and that's what I spent my life studying, was leadership. But what I understand here, what is crystal clear to me in Ukraine, is that the political leadership, all the way down to the average guy on the street in Ukraine, they're united, they want to fight. There's a big difference between supporting Diem in Vietnam, or the Iraqis, or the Afghanis who don't want to fight, don't want to be part of anything at all, and the Ukrainians who want to take it to their enemy. This is a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. This right here, this image. You see Russia's aggression in 2008 in Georgia, in 2014 in Ukraine, in 2015 in Syria, and then in 2022 in Ukraine. And that's the Ukrainians' response. That's the reason to support Ukraine. Hey, listen, thank you for your time. If you have appreciated anything that I've talked about here, would you please give me a like? If you're new, please consider subscribing. And if you want to support my channel, you can buy me a coffee. I will be back tomorrow. I hope you will be back tomorrow as well. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.